So you're at the point in your game where you're making the title screen. Now unless you're making something like a vertical slice or a demo or prologue, they should usually be done toward the end because the entire game can function without it. That being said, it's probably my favorite part of working on a game, so I wouldn't blame you for wanting to do it sooner. Also, just a heads up, I'm going to be doing this in Unity, but the steps should be the same for any engine because this is more of a compositional guide than it is a tutorial. So first, let's look at some indie game title screens and see what we notice. Here in Rivals of Aether, we see a title, a way to start the game, credits in the version of the game, some rocks in the foreground, and then the background. And it's important to note how dynamic it is because a static title screen will almost always look bad. Here we can see the title itself has an animation, the clouds in the background are moving, the smoke is animated, and the enter button's blinking. Now let's see how boring it is if I pause. It instantly loses a lot of life, and since this is the first thing players are going to see, it's important that it's visually interesting. Now let's move on to Super Kiwi 64. This one takes a different approach, where the UI itself is completely still, but the background is constantly changing because the camera is moving. And we still see the same key elements present, which are the title and the way to start the game. Now let's look at a bigger game, Enter the Gungeon. This one starts out with our little reveal animation that again shows us the title, the way to start playing, the version, and then it also functions as a main menu having the options and quit buttons next to play. And just like with Rivals of Aether, a static camera means you need a dynamic scene, so here we see the character moving, as well as the ground, the sky and clouds, the cave entrance, and the dragon above it. So now with that context, let's start on our own title screen. For mine, I'm going to make one for a game I've thought about making before that for this video I've decided to call Nuki 64, which is about a schoolgirl who's part tanuki, which are animals that in Japanese folklore were said to be able to shapeshift, which would be a relevant feature in gameplay. And then just like with Super Kiwi 64, the number indicates that I'm going for the 64-bit style famously used by the Nintendo 64. Which basically just means I'm going to have filtered low-res textures, which I think just looks cool. So first, we're obviously going to need a logo for our title. If you don't already have a logo, I'll be releasing a guide alongside this video, so I'd recommend going and watching that first and then coming back to this part. If you do have one, we're just going to be placing it in the top center area of the screen and making it fairly large. Mine's a little blurry here, but that's just because I want it to match my game's aesthetic of being low-res. Next thing we're going to need is to show how to start the game. I have this press anything to start asset I used for a previous game, so I'll just be reusing that. If you want to use it too, I'll put an Imgur album in the description so you can download and use it yourself. And for this, we just want to put it somewhere below our title where it won't be blocking too much of the background. Speaking of the background, that's our next step. For mine, I created a small wooded area in Blender sticking to the N64 style. And then I place the stump as a focal point, which is where later I'm going to have the main character sitting down. Your background could be custom art made for the screen, but if you're making a 3D game, it's pretty easy to find an existing place and plop your camera there. Now that we have the three main things out of the way, it's time to add extras and make it more dynamic. What I did with these elements was have the logo slowly grow and shrink, have the start prompt fade in and out, and have the camera slightly move around, which just required adding some slight randomness to where it's pointing with the built-in noise feature in Cinemachine. It's already looking a lot better, but we can make it even more dynamic pretty easily. The next thing I did was just add a particle emitter to slowly release faded little pollen particles, which adds just another layer of something moving around. After that, I added some little squiggly lines next to the start prompt, which you'll be able to find as a sprite sheet in the same Imgur album below. Next thing I added was some light beams, as well as some spotlights in the scene to actually light up where they're shining. I made the opacity fade in and out too, which can sort of give it the illusion that the treetops are moving around. And I made the one shining onto the stump especially bright because like I said earlier, my character is going to go there and I want to further emphasize it as a focal point. And since the game would be about shapeshifting, the next thing I did was add a couple of animals to the scene. And I just went for a simple bird and some butterflies I animated in Blender. They had a lot more life to the scene, it only took an hour or two to add them, so I think it was definitely worth the time. The last major thing I added was a character, which I just made a little leg swinging animation for. While researching N64 games, I noticed almost all of them had copyright info on the screen, so I decided to do that too, and I think it really tied together the theme I was going for. So yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below, or you can DM me pictures of your title screen on Twitter and I can give you advice. Like I mentioned before, this video is coming out alongside some other ones, so if you enjoyed, you should check out my other stuff and subscribe if it seems like something you're into. That's all for now. Peace.